Hi, this is Benny. I've dedicated my life to understanding the universe in hopes that someday I am given the opportunity to hop on a rocket and see it for myself. Growing up, my safe space was between the covers of a book. My friends were people like Percy Jackson, Alex Rider, Paddington Bear, Beatrice Pryor, Hermione Granger, and the Astrosaurs, a group of crime-fighting dinosaurs in space. And so, using Space Bites, this podcast, I am hoping to create the same type of safe space where knowledge is for everyone and anything is possible. Together, we can marvel at the boundless beauty of the universe and find hope within the delicate intricacies that weave the fabric of our world. If there's one thing we have in common as human beings, it is our curiosity, and a curious mind is a happy one. Together, we will learn how the gold in our rings was made inside of stars, how the flap of butterfly wings can cause an earthquake, how charged particles from the sun interact with Earth's magnetic field to paint the sky with glowing lights, and how math is the language that describes everything. Every atom in your body was created in a star. The carbon in your DNA, the oxygen you breathe, the calcium in your bones, all of it originated in stellar furnaces. This means that quite literally, the universe is in you. You are a product of cosmic alchemy, billions of years in the making. The same processes that formed galaxies also formed you, linking your existence to the vastness of the universe. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Space Bites with Benny. It's me, Benny, your favorite nerd. Space Bites with Benny is a podcast that aims to make understanding our universe a digestible and bite-sized experience. It's a safe space where anything is possible and where I get to talk to the most interesting people. This is the first episode in the Cosmic Conversation segment, and so we're starting off with one of my favorite people. And so joining me today is a good friend of mine, Stephanie Johnston, who was an engineer at NASA, an astronaut trainer, and someone who is also passionate about making education accessible. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Banan. I'm so thrilled to be on your podcast today. Thank you for inviting me here. I think we could probably get started with a quick intro, if that's all right.
Yes, please go ahead.
So I've spent about 16 years at NASA, which is crazy to think about. The time has really flown by. I started at NASA when I was 20 years old as a co-op student, which is now called the NASA Pathways Internship Program. I started out at Johnson Space Center, which is in Houston, Texas. It's one of many of NASA's centers. And that's kind of where I first stumbled into the world of spacesuits. We call it EVA, which is extravehicular activity. But basically, it's just a fancy way of saying spacewalking. So anything to do with walking in space, the spacesuits, the tools that the astronauts use to perform their spacewalk, that entire system is all of what EVA encompasses. It's a very fascinating field and something that they don't train you a lot about when you're in college. So I learned a lot when I first started in NASA in this field. I transitioned also right from a student working for NASA to full-time at NASA. So I started out full-time training astronauts how to spacewalk. I worked in mission control during those spacewalk operations. So I got the firsthand experience of seeing how astronauts actually perform in these spacesuits, doing these critical tasks that we have on the International Space Station. Later on in my career, I also started learning more about lunar spacewalks that we're going to be doing. So we'll get to that in a little bit as well. After being in operations where I trained astronauts and worked in space control, I moved over to engineering directorate where I actually certified the hardware that we use on the International Space Station, mainly in the airlock. The airlock is all about making sure that the crew can transition out on their spacewalk. So it has all the critical equipment that they need to hook up their spacesuits, to do maintenance on the spacesuits. It's what actually goes down to vacuum before the spacewalk. From there, I also got pulled in to develop the next generations of spacesuits. So after having over 6 years training astronauts how to use the current spacesuits we use on the International Space Station, and after certifying new hardware for the airlock, I got pulled into this whole new realm of developing the next generation of spacesuits, which has been really exciting. Pretty much the last couple of years, I've been focused on building and leading teams of system engineers which are developing those modern spacesuits with a particular focus on lunar surface expeditions under NASA's Artemis program.
So I have to ask, like, do you realize how cool you are, or does that just completely go over your head and you think that, oh yeah, it's normal to be working with such cool people and on such cool projects? Like a very genuine question.
I, I think when you make it part of your day to day, it's always good to step back and look at how many cool opportunities I've had in my career. It is absolutely amazing. But day to day, I'm just trying to do my job and making sure our astronauts are safe, that our teams are built with amazing people that could get their jobs done well. And that's really what drives me is it's the people and the mission. And it is always fascinating though to look back at some of those really cool things that I have done in my career.
That's amazing. And would you say your career chose you, or did you choose your career?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. I think it's a combination of both. I grew up thinking about the stars. I loved astronomy. But I also had a lot of other interests too. I was in theater, doing backstage set design. I grew up working with my dad on construction sites, building houses. I've always been really focused on creating things, building things, seeing how things work. And that kind of led me into aerospace engineering. I started learning more about astronauts and what they do. And I just thought it would be really cool to be in the human space exploration segment, human exploration in particular. So I started really focusing my efforts on getting into the aerospace engineering program. And then I just kind of stumbled into spacesuits, though. So I think I knew the general direction I wanted to head, but I didn't know the specifics until I started working for NASA and just falling in love with the world of EVA.
Yeah, so that's why, the themes of this episode are astronauts and their spacesuits. And I think it's quite common knowledge that it has always been my dream since I was 6 years old to grow up and become an astronaut. So, okay, so here's what being an astronaut means to me, right? So I grew up reading about astronauts like Chris Hadfield and Peggy Whitson. And what I learned is that astronauts are very well-rounded people. Like you just said, you're not just focused on the engineering aspect, but you're a very well-rounded person. And you've got all of these hobbies in different industries and different that stimulate different parts of your brain, right? Like I know, for example, you and I have crocheting in common, which is, not the stereotypical hobby that maybe an engineer would have. And astronauts are also the epitome of endurance, leadership, and dedication. And they're always in a constant state of readiness. And I try my best to apply all of those things in my day-to-day life. Because being an astronaut, the way that I see it, it's not a job or a career, but rather a way of life, if that makes sense. Like you become a mascot for everything that you believe in, for all of your principles, and yeah, that's what I aim to become. So, having worked with astronauts before, would you say that that's a pretty good description?
I think that's a great description. And it's even something I've tried to instill in myself, even though I'm not an astronaut myself. I've been working around astronauts for such a long time, and I've seen the effort they put into their careers and to the mission. I always wanted to be that person that supports them and make sure that they are doing everything they could be when they become an astronaut. And so there's a couple mottos that I've kind of lived by after being in that culture for such a long time. One of my favorites is just being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And as a natural introvert, as somebody who could, I'm pretty sure, be a hermit very easily, I need to push myself to be out there more. And so that's a particular motto that I love. And I've heard astronauts talk about it themselves on you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that is just so true. And I think that's a great phrase to live by, even if you're not an astronaut.
Yeah, I agree because when I think about it, put me on a rocket, send me to space, I'm not scared. But ask me to go to a party with you or ask me to socialize, and then I'm like, oh
Yeah,
no, and my body starts
exactly.
shaking, and I'm like super anxious. So it's just very interesting to see how different people are, right? And on that note, what do you think was your inspiration for pursuing a career in aerospace engineering?
Oh, I think it was a combination of a few things. One, like I said, I love building and creating and seeing how things work, and space is just absolutely fascinating. So put those together, and you just naturally get an aerospace engineer. Um, I also looked at just what would set myself up well in the future and give me some flexibility. So I am very glad looking back that I chose engineering as a degree because I think it did give me a lot of flexibility to do different things in my career. You're gonna see, I think we'll talk about it on LinkedIn and things coming up at the end of this segment, but I'm pretty excited about some transitions that I'm going through with my career right now and some of the things that I could offer to the rest of the world, or at least some certain niches within the aerospace community. And I don't think I would have gotten there without having an engineering background and having that flexibility to pursue those different interests as well.
I really enjoy thinking about this sometimes, where as physicists, we try to understand the fundamentals of the universe, and engineers use those fundamentals to develop our lives. And so I've always been very fascinated with this idea. And it kind of makes sense why a physicist and an engineer would be friends, because we just complement each other so much in the way that we think. And I've always found myself kind of like in between worlds, wanting to understand the universe, but also wanting to contribute to it. Like you said, trying to build things, trying to make something out of it. And so I've always found myself like in between, the physics and engineering world. And I feel like becoming an astronaut is a good balance between those two things, using my understanding of the universe to go and explore it.
Yeah, I think it makes total sense. And I definitely see scientists and engineers working so closely together in all sorts of fields, not just physics either. It takes both scientists and engineers to create something amazing. The scientists are out there really trying to understand how the world works. And then the engineers are trying to figure out how to implement what those scientists are coming up with. And so I think it's an amazing partnership between two very cool but related fields.
Yes, obviously. And before we can start making all of these cool things, obviously nobody's born an engineer already. You have to go through all of, your academic years. You've got to go through certain milestones. So what would you say were some of yours? What's your background like? What are some key milestones that you went through in your life?
Yeah, I think the number one was just getting my bachelor's in science in aeronautical and astronautical engineering. I did that at Purdue University. I did have a full-time offer from NASA right out of school, so I did not pursue another degree after that. I was pretty excited to start working full-time. But I think leading to that offer, I think what made that offer possible was just all of the hands-on experience that I got while pursuing my degree. So the degree is one thing, but I think one of the most important things for future engineers to really consider is the hands-on expertise they need just to learn. Engineering is a very hands-on field. You learn by doing. And so signing up for classes that actually build something, signing up for a professional organization at your school, the theory into practice, even things that aren't quite, quote unquote, engineering related. Like I did a lot of construction work, building things with my hands, just seeing how different pieces come together. I think those really contributed to me being able to land that job at NASA when I first started.
Wow, that's amazing. Just so because my geography is very bad. Where is Purdue University?
It's in Indiana, which is in the middle of the US, I would say. It's about 3 hours outside Chicago, Illinois, and amongst a lot of cornfields.
Did you like going to school there? Was it a pleasant experience, you would say?
I did really enjoy Purdue University. I chose to go there, one, because of its location. I was born outside Chicago, so it was within driving distance. But also, Purdue really emphasized the teamwork aspect of engineering. Some schools, it was more about just the individual academics, but I really found that Purdue focused more on the teamwork. It was more about doing projects together, and every person has their own skill set that they bring to the table. And I think that's been an absolute foundation for me throughout my entire career is really focusing on the team, the teamwork, making sure everybody's bringing together their individual contributions into something absolutely amazing, some big engineering feat that needs to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think we work better together rather than individually because you're not going to go to space by yourself, are you? You're going to need a whole team of
Exactly.
people that are talking to you. Yeah, and so what are some of your key milestones?
I think a lot of my key milestones probably came in after I started working at NASA because I did start at a very young age. I was 20. I did a lot of I did a lot of different things within the EVA realm. As I mentioned before, I think some of my highlights, though, training astronauts for the first time was absolutely amazing. One of the first crew that I got to know was Peggy Whitson, and she had already been to space at the time that I came in to help train her. And so I learned, I think, more from her than she learned from me. But it was an absolutely amazing experience to walk her through her training and to also absorb everything that she knows. And then I think certifying hardware and actually seeing astronauts install it on the International Space Station, ISS, that was definitely a career highlight for me. Not only did I get to do that, but also before we flew that hardware, I got to test it myself in a spacesuit in a vacuum chamber. So I have been down to vacuum, testing hardware that I built and then saw fly and installed and used today. So I think that was probably a career highlight for me. And then I've kind of ended my career. I'm exiting in NASA right now and pivoting to something brand new that I'll be talking about soon on LinkedIn. But one of my most proud moments is probably just the team I've built in the last couple of years. We are doing a lot of amazing things with the Artemis program, and I'm just super proud of the team that I've pulled together and all the people on that team. I have some really amazing people who are stepping up to lead this next generation of spacesuits. We've been working a lot with Axiom Space, who has amazing engineers. It's been phenomenal to see everybody come together to build a new spacesuit. I mean, the spacesuits are very complicated. It takes a huge amount of skill sets and people to make that happen.
And I know they've been trying to make them pretty, right? Because I think you recently collaborated with Prada, like the clothing brand, on one of your spacesuits. Am I right?
I don't know if that's more about making it pretty, though. I think there's a little bit of aesthetic going on. So Axiom did partner with Prada pretty recently this last year. They had a really big reveal in Milan this last year, which was really exciting. But the thing is, Prada is known for some really amazing materials and just like advanced materials that they use for performance racing, like sail racing. And they partner with like Red Bull competitions. And so they don't just make pretty purses, they actually really invest in new fabrics and materials that do very high performance things, in multiple industries. So I think that's really what they're leaning on in that partnership.
I was actually in Milan during the time that they announced it because I'd gone down for an event to meet Sarah Sabri, who's an astronaut for Space for Humanity. So I was in Milan for the when they announced it, and I thought it was just so cool because obviously I saw the videos and stuff, and I was very, very impressed with the work that was happening. And just going back to what you said about the chamber, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like being able to put on the spacesuit and test it out. What was that experience like?
It was amazing. I was terrified because that was one of the very last tests that we went through with this hardware before launch, and we were up against a deadline. And so mentally, all I was thinking about was, oh my gosh, I hope I could clear my ears when we're changing pressure in the spacesuit. I don't want to be the reason that this hardware can't launch because I can't go through with the test. And I feel like that's probably a feeling a lot of astronauts face too, where it's all about them. They don't want to feel like they're the failure, they're holding it up. But at the same time, we're humans, we get sick, we don't, it's sometimes your body doesn't want to work with you. And so going into that test, one of the things that surprised me the most was more of that human aspect. I had worked with our flight surgeons before doing the test too, to make sure I had like Sudafed or other decongestants ready to go in case, Houston allergies were getting to me where I couldn't clear my ears. They put heart rate monitors on you. So they look at how you're performing. And I was definitely nervous. So my heart rate was a little bit higher than it probably should have been, but I was just a bundle of nerves and excitement, all mixed into one. But once I got past that nervousness and excitement, the test itself was really fascinating. It was one of the few times I've actually been able to go into a flight spacesuit. There's been plenty of times where I've been in spacesuits myself before, but most of those have been in training suits, suits that are meant more for underwater operations where we could practice doing a spacewalk or 1G events. And so most of them are built very similar to the flight suits, but they have some different feelings. They maybe don't have all of the applications, all of the electronics, all of the life support systems installed when doing various training events. And so that was the first time I've been in a fully certified flight ready spacesuit with all the bells and whistles. And so I was able to see how it really functions going down to vacuum, the sounds that happen. I heard my voice change when you go down to a very low pressure. So these spacesuits are close to 4 psi, 4.3 psi, and your voice changes. Your voice gets deeper at those pressures. The sounds, you hear the sounds in the spacesuit as it's going down to vacuum. All of those experiences, it was fascinating as an engineer, seeing how everything works and how the spacesuit operated and how my body operated within those environments as well.
I'm getting chills. I'm just hearing you talk about this. I'm getting chills because it's like I'm imagining what I would feel like if I was put in a situation like that. And I know that obviously I'm, like kind of fangirling now and super excited about it. But I know that if I was in that situation, I would have to be very like emotionally controlled and very like focused and not being all like excited and like bubbly about it. But I think, I'm at that stage where it's okay that, I'm getting chills and I'm really enjoying listening to you talk about these things. And just, I feel like this is a good time to transition to talking more about spacesuits from a technical perspective. But just out of curiosity, what do you do? Because you mentioned that you were feeling nervous when you knew you had to go into the spacesuit. What do you do in situations like that? How do you, put aside your nervousness and focus on the task at hand instead?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two elements to it. One is the before. So right before walking into that event, how can I mentally prepare for it? So part of it's just making sure I'm ready. Like, have I done all of the work that I needed to ahead of time? Have I reviewed the procedures? I understand what's going to go on. In this case, I even did some practice runs in a training suit just to make sure I could move the right way I needed to make sure I could push all the switches, that I could do all the operations that I needed to. I even did some workouts ahead of time to make sure, I wasn't going to put too much stress on like my shoulder or something to be able to fully complete all of the operations. And then there's just that mental preparedness too. I went for some runs that weekend to kind of blow off some of the stress. I like to do breathing exercises too, just making sure I take a deep breath and make sure I'm breathing. And I'll do that during the event as well. Just calm, deep breaths every time I feel like I need to calm myself down a little bit. And then I feel like once I get through that, once the event actually starts, all that preparation pays off. And then it's like a switch happens where I am able to then focus. Like, I already know what's going to happen. I could just focus on the procedure and the next steps, and I know what I'm supposed to do. It also helps in situations like that where you have these massive events happening. And I mean, they're dangerous events too. Something can go wrong. I know that the people around me supporting that event were also ready. And that if I messed up or if something bad happened to the chamber, something bad happened to the suit, whatever the case is, I knew that the team around me would come in and make sure that I got out there safe. So I had absolutely no fear of the event itself. I knew I was going to be okay because the people around me were absolutely amazing, and I knew I could trust them. And so most of it was just the mental, like, don't freeze, don't be the deer in headlights, not being able to perform. And so, yeah, I think that preparedness heading into the event helped. And then I could just kind of go on autopilot once I was there.
So I guess that's where all my like gym workouts come in handy because I've
Yeah.
been told my workouts are a bit excessive at times. And I'm like, no, but I'm not like training to run a marathon. I'm training to go to space, running every day, trying to run 6, 7K every day is not excessive. So that's a good reason then. And once again, that it's so beautiful, this like aspect of being surrounded by people that you trust, knowing that you feel safe because you've got the best of the best helping you work through this, helping make sure that everybody succeeds, right? I think that's so beautiful. And that's
Yeah.
also the beautiful thing about space, right? Because you always see, if you watch like the live videos on YouTube of any rocket launch, it's one person speaking, yeah, but they always show you like the control rooms, and there's like 40, 50 people in there, and all of those people, their sole focus is to make sure that the mission is successful. And I think it would be funny if like if you had that sort of support for like mundane everyday like tasks, you could probably get so much done, so efficiently. But yeah. Okay, so moving on to spacesuits and their roles in missions, because obviously a spacesuit is an astronaut's like best friend, right? It's like the tool that they use. And I've heard spacesuits being described as self-contained life support systems. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I see spacesuits as almost their own spacecraft, except it's designed around the human body. So when we're out doing a spacewalk, especially if it's untethered, completely independent of the vehicle it just left, that spacesuit is providing oxygen, temperature control, protection from the harsh environments of space. It is an entirely self-contained spacecraft, but it has this amazing human element of being designed around the human body so the human body can operate in those extreme environments. One thing that we probably need to talk about too is just the different types of suits that we have, where I've really been focused on what we call EVA suits, extravehicular activity suits. And those are usually independent of the vehicle. They go down to vacuum. They allow astronauts to do a spacewalk or a moonwalk. We also have IVA suits, though. And so those are intra-vehicle activity suits, also called flight suits or crew survival suits. They help keep the crew safe in the event of some kind of failure of the vehicle. So these are the suits that the crew would wear on Earth launch. So if something happened, if they have to abort the mission or they lose pressure in the cabin, or they have to do like some kind of water landing and actually leave the spacecraft in the water, it is designed to keep the crew safe depending on how the vehicle might fail. Hopefully it's a suit that they never actually have to use in real life. Hopefully it's just something that they wear as a precaution, but they do go through a lot of testing to make sure that these suits operate and the crew knows how to operate them in the event of a failure as well. There are some suits.
That's a good question. Sorry. So they have the IVAs on during the launch. So are the EVAs parked somewhere else? Okay. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so if we have a mission where we have two separate flight suit and an EVA suit, the EVA suits are usually in a vehicle somewhere. So they could be in a cargo vehicle, they could be launched in an airlock, depending on the mission. But those are usually stowed to the side, and then they'll if any assembly is required, they'll assemble them, test them out before using them for a spacewalk. There are some missions, though, where we actually combined those two functions into one spacesuit. Apollo is a really good example of this. The first lunar missions that we had amazing spacesuits back then, but due to mass constraints and other reasons, they chose to have an IVA suit also be an EVA suit. So the same suits that they wore during the launch of an Apollo mission were the same suits that they also used for a spacewalk. Now, they had to do some configuration. For example, they put on the portable life support system. It's basically the backpack that you see in the back of spacesuits as they're walking around. So they would install that after they do any of the dynamic phases of flight, so they could perform a spacewalk completely independent of the vehicle still. However, that there's some drawbacks in doing this. When you try to combine that many requirements into a single, you can limit some of the capabilities. So it's not optimized for either being a flight suit or being an EVA suit. For example, mobility. It was a big one during Apollo. You'll see them bouncing around a lot and you feel like you don't see the joints moving as much. And part of that's because they needed some soft joints, because that's what was safer to be a flight suit. So we still needed them to have a crew survivability option with these suits. And so if you have a lot of like hard bearings, hard components that help with mobility, but can put too much strain on your body in the event of an abort, it could actually do some very severe damage to the human body if we did that. So those suits were were combined were we combined a lot of the requirements of those suits, and so they weren't quite optimized, but they did what they needed to do for that mission.
And
For
is
the art,
this, oh, sorry. So is this the suit that Neil Armstrong had on when
yes,
he first landed on the moon? Wow.
yes, it
Oh.
was. Yep. So the very first moonwalk ever, that was the Apollo spacesuit.
And you were about to talk about the Artemis suits, yes?
Yes. So just looking at some of the differences with the Artemis program, so NASA's Artemis program is getting us back to the moon. We we've basically chosen for that program to have two different types of suits. So they do have their flight suits that they'll wear in like the Orion capsule for keeping them safe when they're launching from Earth and then reentry back to Earth. And then they have dedicated EVA suits designed to walk on the moon. And so that we're able to optimize for mobility more. We're able to optimize some of the life support equipment because those two suits are different. So both suits were able to be optimized for the operations and environments that they'll see.
And just to clarify, the Artemis mission is our return to the moon after 56 years. Am I, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah. I can't do that math quickly in my head. It's been a long time. We
Yeah.
went to the moon with the Apollo program back in the late 60s, um, into the early 70s. So it's been a very long time
And I
since
think they're hoping to
walking on the moon.
and they're hoping to land the first woman on the moon as well, which I think is very cool.
Yes, yes. One of the first missions coming, well, I say the first crewed mission coming up is Artemis 2, and they have selected a female astronaut for that, Christina Cook. That mission is focused on more of the trajectory, and so they're going to be going around the moon and testing out the spacecraft and the trajectory of the mission, but they won't be landing on the lunar surface. Artemis 3, and hopefully they'll announce the astronaut selected for Artemis 3 sometime this year. They will be focused more on that first lunar surface mission. So they'll go to the moon, meet up with the human landing system provided by SpaceX, land on the moon, do their first moonwalks, and then come back to Earth.
Wow. That's all I can say. Like I need to sort of spend a day or two absorbing all the information that I've been given, and I think everyone listening to this podcast would agree. How do you say, you're just like a fountain of knowledge, which is very cool. And obviously these are all spacesuits that you have at NASA, and so I'm sure different countries use different suits, right? Is that something that you can talk about?
Yeah, there are different spacesuits in different countries. It kind of depends on where you're from. So, for example, the Russians have their own airlock on the International Space Station. So even though we share the same space station, they have their own segment on that space station. So they perform their own spacewalks on a spacesuit called the Orlan. And they also have their own crew survival suits as well. So any crew flying on the Soyuz will wear a Russian crew survival suit. And then the Russians also perform their own spacewalks using the Orlan spacesuit from their Russian airlock on the International Space Station. For, I'd say, a lot of the other partners on the International Space Station generally use the US spacesuits. A lot of countries also have their own training suits. So even if they use, say, a US spacesuit for the mission, they may still train their crew on spacesuits that they've made for their test facilities and prep for their astronauts. I know the European Space Agency, I think, has some new training suits that they've been using. As far as the flight suits are concerned, so the crew survival suits, every private company that launches crew from Earth also has their own flight suits because it's really vehicle dependent. So, for example, spacesuit or SpaceX has their own flight suits that they use, and we've all seen the black and white spacesuits that they use. Maybe I should call them spacesuits. SpaceX has their own flight suits designed for the SpaceX vehicle. Blue Origin has their own flight suits for their vehicle, the New Glenn. So yeah, I think many private companies, as well as some international countries, all have different flight suits and spacesuits depending on how they're operating.
So I guess it doesn't really matter too much what the differences are, as long as they're supporting the astronauts to become successful on their missions, correct? So
Correct.
what would you say are, three or four important characteristics for these spacesuits to have despite their differences?
I think it comes back to so protection from any of the environments that they're going to be facing. That could be micrometeorites, some of the radiation like UV rays from the sun. It could be vacuum. So I think all of them have that in common because whether you're planning to go on a spacewalk and you're actually at vacuum versus a vehicle that maybe lost pressure in the vehicle, they need to be able to operate at vacuum. So protection is a big one. Another one is mobility. There needs to at least be enough mobility to get the crew to safely perform any task they need to. So for spacewalking, it's all about walking and moving. And sometimes that's floating if you're in microgravity, sometimes that's actually walking on the lunar surface. But if you're also in a flight suit, survival suit, that'll be more focused on can you get safely out of the vehicle in an abort situation. And so it's still about movement, but the movement's different. Life support is the other one. It can either be completely contained in the spacesuit, like I said, the backpack, the portable life support system, or it could be through an umbilical from the vehicle. But at the end of the day, they need to have that life support, the oxygen, the CO2 removal, the temperature regulation, all of that has to happen in these suits.
And I think very famously, when Chris Hadfield had to perform a spacewalk, I think his eye was tearing up, and he was asked to let some of the oxygen out of his suit. Am I right? And it was like this moment of, this was his life support system. He needs this oxygen to breathe. And I learned about this reading his autobiography. He was asked to let some of that oxygen out, and I think that is it's one of those times when your survival instincts are telling you not to do this, but in fact the only way he was going to survive was if he did that, if he let the oxygen out. Is this a story that you're familiar with at all?
I don't know that particular story, but it is part of the procedures for some of the spacesuits. So if there is, say, too much carbon dioxide buildup in the suit, some part of the system fails, or a sensor picks up a particular reading, you could let out that CO2 by opening up a purge valve on the spacesuit. So the oxygen is still being supplied in from the life support system, but then you're letting it as an open loop escape to vacuum. I actually had to do this when I was doing that vacuum test that I was telling you about. So that was part of the test, is that I opened up a purge valve in my system, and could this system support me in that operation? So there was nothing holding me back from the vacuum of the chamber at that time. And I'm sure it's even more nerve-wracking doing that in space when you don't have a crew of chamber experts surrounding you. But it is part of the nominal procedures in the event that, I shouldn't say nominal procedures, it is part of the procedure in the event that we need to purge CO2 from the suit.
Having grown up in Saudi, so I'm from Jeddah, which is a city that's right by the coast. And like a regular hobby that most people have is to go scuba diving. And so I was scuba diving with my friends one time, and there's like this training exercise you do where you take the mouthpiece, like you move it away from your mouth while you're underwater, and you also purge. You let out these like little bubbles out of your mouth, and then you put the mouthpiece back. And it was one of those times when my brain just decided to turn off, because as I removed the mouthpiece away from me, instead of purging, I like left my mouth open, and all of that pressure of being underwater, like under the sea, just all of that water I like swallowed. And there was like half a second of like panic, and I was like, no, like calm down. If you're panicking, then we're not gonna survive this. And I looked at the head coach that we were underwater with, and I was kind of panicked, but for half a second I panicked, and then I got this like very intense moment of clarity, and I didn't panic, and I put the mouthpiece back into my mouth, and I clicked like there's like a little button that you press, and it pushes the oxygen back into your mouth, and I was able to breathe again. And that was one of the moments in my life when I was like, like it really proved to me, like, you can say that you're tough, you can say that, you're good under pressure, but that was one of the moments when I was like, oh, I was in a like a life and death situation, and I could have panicked, because most people, if you're underwater and something like that happens, their main instinct is to start swimming up, which you're not supposed to do because of the difference in pressure. So instead of freaking out, I was kind of like, okay, this thing is happening, but it's okay because I'm going to figure it out. And it might have just been like 30 seconds to a minute, but in my mind it felt so slow. And this is a story that I always like going back to, one because I just shows how goofy, how silly I can be sometimes, and also I like telling it because it feels like, yes, I am good under pressure, and that kind of proved it to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody has those moments. Even seasoned astronauts have those moments of panic. They did something wrong, or it didn't quite go as planned, or they froze, but then they get over it. It's taking that pause and say, it's going to be okay. Let's work through it. It's also why we spend so much time on emergency procedures as well. Hopefully you never need these things in an emergency, but if you do, you could go on autopilot if you need that backup. While your brain is panicking, you're still going through the motions of whatever emergency procedures you need to go through.
Okay, so we've talked about astronauts, we've talked about their spacesuits. What about the team of people that they have still on, the little blue planet supporting them?
Yeah, I think, as we mentioned a little bit already, I think teamwork is so important, and it's such an important feature of engineering in general, especially in the space industry when we're trying to do these amazing things. You'll see, as far as astronauts are concerned, they have this huge village of people supporting them in the background. Actually, if you want to check it out, the NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson that we mentioned earlier, she has this amazing Tumblr series. I think it's from 2016, but it's called "It Takes a NASA Village to Train an Astronaut." If you want to learn about the people behind the scenes training astronauts, it takes years to go through all the training. And so you have a massive amount of people helping these astronauts prepare for their mission. It could be, other engineers and flight controllers. It could be people who are really focused on the physical fitness of the astronauts and making sure they're getting the right training in. So it kind of goes through all of that. It's a really good it's a good series if you want to see it. And then for more recent examples too, you could follow most of the astronauts on like LinkedIn or other socials. And every once in a while, an astronaut will do kind of a series of all the training leading up to a mission. I know Johnny Kim is doing that right now. He's launching, I think, in March of 2025. So here in a couple, maybe next month. And he's been doing some more posts on just the training that he's been through. And that also highlights all the people that have supported him and helped him through all the training. So the training is a really big thing.
And I think Johnny Kim, sorry, just Johnny Kim was a nightmare for most of us growing up, because I think he's a NASA astronaut. He's also a doctor, and he was in the military. And it was like, oh, in a lifetime, you're usually only one of those things. But growing up, we had to read about him, and he was doing all of these different things at the same time. And it's like, oh no, he just set the bar way too high. You know what I mean?
He just set a very high bar.
Yeah, that's true.
I would say that's not very common, though. I mean, astronauts are amazing. They have all this unique background, but I can't think of another astronaut that has the same qualifications as Johnny Kim.
Yeah, he's awesome. And I'll also post the link. You said it's called It Takes a Village. It Takes a NASA Village, rather. I'll put that link in the description for anyone who wants to check it out. But yeah, please keep going.
I think the other part of teamwork when it comes to these missions is just the engineering behind everything that makes this possible. So it's not just about training the astronauts, it's about designing the spacecrafts and the systems and the spacesuits that it needs, that the astronauts are going to need to use in space. So one of the things that we really focus on as engineers is the end users. So when we're supporting these missions, we need to make sure the astronauts know how to use them. And if something goes wrong, they know how to fix it, or at least can fix it with the right instructions, even if they don't have it memorized themselves. By the way, they won't. We have a lot of things that could go wrong, and a lot of systems. The International Space Station is as big as a American football field. It's huge. You're not going to know everything. We spend a lot of time with astronauts on getting their feedback, especially when it comes to things like the spacesuits. because it's designed around them. It's designed around their body, and they need to be able to operate it. So we spend a lot of time in the spacesuit design to make sure we get feedback from our astronauts through all of the development.
So are these spacesuits personalized to them? So the same spacesuit cannot be reused for different astronauts?
Not today. It was in the past. So there have been past missions where it was very customized for that particular person. Today, we do have a lot more astronauts that we can fly. And so we've gone towards more of a modular approach where just like you could go in your closet and you have different size pants and different size shirts. We do that with our spacesuits right now, where you could get different size legs and different size arms and different gloves, and you could pair them together. So if somebody has shorter sized arms but have the same size legs, you just switch out the arms between astronauts. I think out of all of them, the gloves are the more specialized. So people have very unique hand shapes, and it's also one of the more critical things that you need to be able to do a successful mission. So we spend a lot of time making sure that the gloves fit really well. They're still not customized though. So when I do my training events, they usually pick Peggy Whitson, and I have similar shaped hands apparently. So I'll use her backup gloves if she's not using them.
That is so cool. That is like such a cool thing to have in common with someone. But because it's Peggy Whitson,
Yeah, right.
yeah, just okay. So kind of moving away from spacesuits and astronauts and moving more towards like the common goals and the common passions that you and I share. In most recent years, I'd say space has become a lot more democratized. It's become, there's like this commercial aspect to it as well. What would you say excites you the most about that?
I think and maybe it's more of a hopefulness. I really hope that as we get more countries involved, as we get more private companies involved, that all of that engagement in space exploration and research really helps accelerate the technological advancements that not only aids our space travel, but also brings back benefits to the rest of us on Earth. There are so many cool like NASA spin-offs, for example, that you could go look up, like all the things that NASA has been part of that are now in our day-to-day lives today. And I think we're going to see more and more and more of that as space becomes more democratized.
And what is the type of astronaut that you would be really excited to see? Because, astronauts are no longer, ex-military or scientists specifically. No, they could be anything or anybody. So what kind of astronaut are you excited to see?
Yeah, that's a hard question because I think we've already seen so many different types of astronauts. So even if they're focused on some kind of STEM background or came from the military, a lot of them also bring in these other interests. We've seen teachers in space, we've seen artists in space, we've seen musicians in space. You could go on YouTube and actually listen to some musicians playing their instruments in space. I would like to see that continue. I think it brings such heart to the mission on you don't have to just be an engineer or a scientist or in these fields you could also bring in your personality and your other interests into the space realm. I think it's really amazing to see. So I love that. I think the other trend I really like, not maybe a particular type of person to fly, but I like the trend of getting more nationalities working together. I think space tends to be a unifier. It's a place where we can set aside our differences and work towards common goals because spaceflight is really hard. Even today, you need a lot of people coming together to make it happen. And so it's one of the few places you could really set aside your differences and have people from across the world have a single focus and mission. And I hope that continues. We even see examples of it in things happening today, like the Artemis Accords. Over 50 countries have signed the Artemis Accords at this point, which is really amazing. So we see a lot of interest in space, even from countries that don't have their own space programs that just want to be part of it.
Could you explain what the Artemis Accords are?
The Artemis Accords provides a common set of principles to enhance the governance of the civil exploration and use of outer space.
Cool.
So it's just basically restating that we're coming together to do this together, and that it's all for the peaceful exploration of space, and that's bringing a lot of countries together.
I love that because when people share a common goal, we stop being mean to each other, which is a very nice way of putting it. But we stop being mean to each other and like butting heads because we're then focused on that common goal and trying to come together to make something so beautiful. And it's so cool to think about. I think the International Space Station has so many contributions from so many countries around the world, and it's like this little extension of our planet where we get along, you know what I mean, like you said, where it's like people with different backgrounds just come together, and that is something I'm very excited to experience. And we've spoken about different types of missions like the Apollo and the Artemis missions. Is there a specific type of mission that you would like to see happen? Maybe to like a certain planet or a certain like part of space. Even if it's super sci-fi and it's not, possible, what would be your dream mission?
Oh gosh. I don't think I have one in particular. I think I'm more focused on just the technology advancements and getting us like a little bit further. And I think I've been so focused on how do we help crews stay safe for long duration future space flight missions. That's something I'm really interested in, is just those baby steps and how can we advance mission after mission and make it better and better and go further and further. I would also love to see more science happening in space. I know the International Space Station is getting quite old right now. I'm pretty excited for more space stations that can take all the lessons learned from the ISS and apply it to a new space station and allow more scientists to fly their payloads and do science. Because microgravity is a very unique environment to do a lot of things. It helps with a lot of like medical advancements. It has just a very unique platform that you can't get on Earth. I would like to see that happen more too on just research and science.
That's something I'm very passionate about because during my master's thesis at the moment, I'm working with instrumentation. So stuff like, telescopes, spectroscopic surveys. And I think it would be very cool if I'm able to work on instruments like that, specifically for cosmology in space. And maybe even stuff like dark matter detectors or neutrino detectors, because these are all still like the big questions that we don't understand about our universe. And just sort of to like wrap up, is there anything that you would like to talk about or mention to our listeners right now? Because, like I mentioned, we are both pretty passionate about making education accessible. How are you contributing to that?
Yeah, one thing I've been doing on the side for a while now is writing about everything that I've experienced on gatheringmoonbows.com, which is really geared towards providing free content for aspiring engineers and other STEM students and professionals, so early career professionals, to help them grow in their careers. A lot of it is focused on taking all the, quote unquote, soft skills or power skills or people skills that I've learned and applying them to a STEM career, and how that's helped me grow. And I want that to help other people grow. I also feel like there's not a lot of conversation when you're in college on what your career path actually looks like after you leave college and what that really means. So just because you became for my example, an aerospace engineer, what does that look like when you leave school, and what type of roles can you actually play? For me, I went in spacesuits. I would have never thought I could do spacesuits. And I work with people with so many different types of background. It's hard to chart, your degree that you get in engineering with what you actually do in the real world once you graduate. And I want to help people understand their options. I'm also pretty excited about launching a new program soon that I'm calling Engineer Your Journey. It's not live yet, but it will be soon, hopefully. It's going to be engineeryourjourney.com. Basically, it's a program designed to guide you through the next big transition in your aerospace career. I feel like there's the common phrase of change is the only constant. The world around us is constantly changing. Change happens internally, even. I know my own priorities have changed in life over time as I've grown older. So whether you're transitioning from like college to the real world, or whether you're trying to figure out how to accelerate in your career or move through a transition in your career, the goal of this program is to provide the resources, tools, and a community for intentional career planning, so people can help themselves through a big transition and really figure out what they want to do in their aerospace field or even other engineering and science fields.
So that's very cool. So you're sort of like the Yoda of the next generation of engineers, or maybe like a less nerdy example. I love the name Engineer Your Journey. I think says very directly what you're going to be doing for, yeah, so I like it's super creative. Yeah, and I think it's cool that you're sort of, using all this knowledge and experience that you have and wanting to pass it down to the future generation. Why is that something that you're passionate about, you would say?
I think I'm trying to answer the questions that I had when I was starting out. I'm the first person in my immediate family, at least, to go to college. And so I had a lot of questions. My parents were amazing and supportive, but they also didn't go to college themselves. And so I was trying to figure out, what does that mean? Where should I go? What are my options? And I want to be that help for the next generation. Any lessons that I could share, I would love to be able to share with others, to give back when I can. I've also been mentoring students pretty much ever since I graduated. It's one of my favorite things to do. One of my favorite programs to mentor the last, I say 12 years was NASA's Micro G Next program. It started out with zero-G flights. So the bomb and comment, essentially, that where you actually experience microgravity, which was really fun. Unfortunately, that program ended over 10 years ago. And so we transitioned to testing out building EVA tools in the neutral buoyancy lab. So students can design the next generation of tools that we need to use for a spacewalk or a lunar walk. And they actually get to go to Houston, Texas, and test the tool in the neutral buoyancy lab with real engineers and even sometimes astronauts to test out their tool. So it's one of my favorite things to just help students understand the engineering principles and put it into real life and be part of a program like that.
Wow. And if you could say one thing to anybody listening right now who dreams about becoming an engineer and contributing to the space industry, or becoming an astronaut, or not even anything to do with the space industry, just being brave enough to dream and become anything that they want to be, what would you say to that person?
I say that you could be whoever you want to be. You might not be able to be everything at the same time if you have a lot of dreams, but I would say focus on the thing that you really want, map out how you're going to get there, and enjoy the process along the way. I think that's the most important part. If you don't like what you're doing along the way, you're not going to get to that long-term goal later. So find those things that you are really passionate about. So if you want to be an astronaut, for example, what do you like to do in the meantime? Find the thing that you love to do that you could bring to the table as an astronaut and really dive into that. Be the expert, be that person who other people aspire to.
Okay, cool. And I think that's all that we have time for today. I will post your socials in the episode description for everyone who's interested in following along your journey. I hope you. I wish you all the good luck in the world with engineer your journey. See, easy to remember. And for everyone who's listening, please share the episode and join the conversation about the future of space. Hit the follow button and the bell button to get a notification every time I release a new episode. And please feel free to reach out for questions on Reddit or via email. And thank you so much, Stephanie, for your time. I really appreciate having you here. And I hope you also enjoyed talking about your experiences.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was great. And it was just a fun conversation.